I'm going to share with you how after 15 years of searching, I finally found an efficient, anatomically informed solution to the overhead mobility problem. So my journey started in my 20s. It was about 2010. I started learning handstands and Olympic weightlifting. And despite playing lots of different sports growing up, I'd never been really exposed to anything that required this, full overhead lockout of the shoulders. And I really sucked at it. Like, I was instantly conscious that my overhead position was really poor. I can remember watching a video of an overhead squat or a snatch off CrossFit.com and like being excited about the movement and going to the gym and like picking up the 20-kilo barbell and putting it overhead. And as soon as I tried to squat down, I basically like crumbled, and I was like, oh man, like I suck at this. And it's like same thing when I would try a handstand. I was just couldn't like open my shoulders. I had this tightness in my shoulders and back and chest that just wouldn't allow me to get into the position. So I initially started to, in my head, there was like one solution. I was like, I just need to find that one stretch and do it a lot, and that'll solve the problem. So I kind of tried tons of different stretches. And then I realized, lots of other people have probably encountered this problem before me. So like handstand coaches, Olympic weightlifting coaches, mobility experts. And I found some like protocols, which were like series of stretches and soft tissue work. And I tried these as well, and I did have some success. My position definitely improved, and as my position improved, my performance on the movements, my snatches, my clean and jerks, my handstands, they did feel better, but I never really solved the problem. And I always had this inhibition. So anytime I was doing an overhead movement, I was always like pushing against my own tightness. And I just have this feeling that continually like training and pushing my body into a position where it wasn't comfortable is probably what resulted in the chronic shoulder pain that I've had over the years, and eventually resulted in me having surgery to reattach 2 of my rotator cuff tendons. So this was like 6 months ago now, and at first, at the time, like having to have surgery seemed like the worst thing in the world, like not being able to train, not being able to play any of the sports that I loved. But just from past experience, I also knew that, like, man, you always learn so much from being injured. So I was in this this place after the surgery. I had that phase of being in a sling and totally disabled in terms of my right arm for a good amount of time. I was doing all the rehab, and sort of 3 months post-surgery, I was just starting to put my hands on the ground again and think about doing a handstand. And this like period of being disabled had really like fueled the fire inside me to reclaim all my skills. Before surgery, in terms of hand balancing, I was getting consistent 1-minute holds. But as I said, I still felt a bit inhibited and uncomfortable in that position. And after a few sessions of trying handstands at about the 3 or 4 month mark, I was doing like 10 to 20 second free handstands again. But it just felt totally wrong. You could feel there was a massive imbalance. The shoulder that had been operated on just didn't open at all. And I was like really fighting for every second up there. There wasn't like a nice, like calm balance that I'd had before, that I'd been able to find before. So I started to apply some of the tools I'd used over the years, and it got a little bit better, but there was still a huge imbalance, and it felt really bad. And at this point, I stumbled across a video on Instagram posted by a guy in Australia named Harry O'Williams. Harry's a handstand coach.
When we first get involved in hand balancing, one of the first deficiencies that we'll likely realize is our inability to be able to properly flex the shoulder. And so what many
As I watched this video, like light bulb after light bulb just kept going off in my head. Everything he was saying and showing was like validated by the experiences I'd had trying to solve this problem over the years. And like the video just brought all these concepts together, and I could see like things I'd done wrong. I understood things I'd been doing wrong. I understood like how I needed to change the protocols that I'd been using to try and open up my shoulders. And like the video ended, and I just like watched it again. and again. I think I watched it like 6 times in a row. And on the last time, I just like jotted down 4 stretches on a piece of paper that I gleaned from the video. And as I said, this was like a really intense light bulb moment. I get super excited about this kind of stuff. And so I wrote down the stretches and I headed straight to the gym to give it a go. And I got to the gym and I go through this series of stretches 3 times. And I'm not really like pushing the intensity that much. I'm just like feeling each position, finding what's comfortable, go through it 3 times. And then I'm just like, okay, well, let's test it out. So I put my hands on the floor and I kick up into a handstand. And on the first attempt, I find like that straight position. And immediately I'm just like, yes, like the imbalance that has been there in my shoulder is like totally gone. My shoulders feel not just as good as they were before surgery, but like almost as good as they've ever been in a handstand. And like I said, I didn't do any like handstand warm up. I didn't prime my wrists and do some wall facing holds like I normally would to get myself warm. It was literally just like, I've done these stretches, hands on the floor, kick up, and I held for 47 seconds, and which was like way longer than I'd held before. But it was just how awesome it felt. So as soon as I kicked down out of the handstand, I grabbed my phone and I sent a message to Harry saying like, thank you so much for sharing this information. And yeah, I was just like super excited, not just to be like, oh man, this injury and surgery hasn't meant like I can't do handstands anymore. So I like reclaim this thing that I love to do. But also I was like, it validated like the understanding that I'd gained and this new knowledge that I was sort of developing or like receiving from Harry. And yeah, so I was like, if 3 rounds, like I did like 20, 25 minutes of stretching, if that could make this huge change, like what happens if I do this for, you know, consistently a few times a week for 3 months? You know, can I finally get rid of that like inhibition in my overhead position that's remained even after all these years of work? So I was super excited about it from a personal perspective. But then also as a coach, I've been a coach for like 15 years now, and like to be able to kind of have the opportunity to take this new knowledge and develop a process with my students that I can use to help anyone who's, you know, wanting to do the overhead stuff to solve their inhibitions and, you know, improve their overhead position and sort of enjoy their activity more and, you know, and be better at it. Yeah, so I was super excited from a coaching perspective, and also just to be able to explain like the reason behind every stretch in the protocol and like the nuance of each stretch. I really felt like I'd gained a new understanding of like the underlying structures in the shoulder and like the fundamental parts of the problem and how to solve them step by step. So as promised, I'm now going to deliver this solution to the overhead mobility problem, the 3 simple steps, and each step includes a concept and then a drill or a stretch that can be used to solve it. So, first of all, glenohumeral internal rotation for full flexion. So, what does this mean? Glenohumeral, so your glenohumeral joint, this is your humerus, your upper arm bone, and it like sits on the glenoid in your shoulder girdle, and this movement is glenohumeral rotation. So this is internal rotation, external rotation. Internal, external. Yeah. So when we internally rotate our shoulders, that allows us to fully flex. Don't take my word for this though, try it yourself. If you externally rotate both glenohumeral joints and then try to bring your arms overhead, if you're like me, you'll hit a block before you reach vertical. And then if you allow your shoulder joints to internally rotate, you'll be able to reach the vertical position, or at least get closer. You can also do this with a back to wall shoulder flexion test. So if I take the underhand grip on the stick and focus on external rotation of the shoulders, I hit the block. Whereas if I change my grip to an overhand grip and allow my shoulders to internally rotate, I can reach the vertical position that I need for handstands and Olympic weightlifting. Now, this is really interesting because I've encountered two methods over the years that proposed exactly the opposite solution. I went on a weightlifting seminar where they delivered their method, and they were suggesting that you should stay fully externally rotated when you're in the overhead position in the snatch. I really fought for this position, and then later on I worked with Eric from Weightlifting 101, and I kind of told him that these guys delivered it in this way, and he said, well, like, let's just watch some elite weightlifting. So we went and watched, like, 5 or different world championships and Olympics, and just looked at the position the guy's shoulders were in when they're snatching. You're like, okay, right, nobody's in full external rotation, everyone's somewhere in between. So I kind of like did that with my weightlifting, but I didn't understand it well enough to like make the knowledge carry over into sort of solving the overhead mobility problem. The second piece of advice I received that contradicted this idea of glenohumeral internal rotation for full flexion is this stretch here. It's quite a popular one. It's called the butcher's block stretch, and it basically forces your glenohumeral joints into external rotation. So you can see the weight between my hands is blocking them from coming inwards. So this is blocking my shoulders in external rotation, and then I kind of use gravity to force my armpits open. I'm kind of forcing my shoulder into flexion. So it feels very intense, and kind of according to that old Chinese proverb of harder is better, it seems like the right thing to do. But in fact, what you're doing is shortening certain rotator cuff muscles and then probably overstretching them with this position. And this kind of made a lot of sense because I'd done this stretch a lot. I always found it really uncomfortable and painful. And I probably weakened the muscles of my rotator cuff, which is what resulted in me having surgery, or at least maybe contributed to the tear that needed to be surgically repaired. So, as I said, glenohumeral internal rotation for full flexion. And we're going to do this with half eagle hangs. So you can see the stretch demonstrated here. You can do it first of all with your feet on the floor to take some of the weight, and if you feel good, you can then go to like hanging with full body weight. If you're really tight, you might want to take a slightly wider stance, wider grip with your hands. And then maybe over weeks and months, you gradually work your way into a shoulder width grip. So this is the first drill. Half eagle hangs to help teach your glenohumeral joint to internally rotate to achieve full flexion. Nice. So, second concept. Pecs and lats. So the pecs and lats are the two major muscle groups that cross the shoulder joint. So what does this mean? It means they have their origin on one side of the shoulder joint and their insertion on the other side of the shoulder joint. So in the case of the pecs, you've got the pecs origin on the rib cage and sternum, and then it crosses the shoulder joint and inserts on the upper arm. So the pecs are kind of pushing muscles. And then with the lats, your lats insert in your lumbar spine, and then, their origin is in your lumbar spine, and then they insert on the upper arm, and they're kind of like pulling muscles. But when you want to lift your arm overhead, both these sets of muscles need to lengthen. Now, here's a nuance that's really important. You need to stretch your pecs and lats unilaterally. And the reason for this is because to get the deepest stretch, to lengthen the muscle the most, you need to, in the case of the lats, you kind of need to side flex. And when you side flex, it means you're lengthening this lat, but you're shortening the other one. But that's okay, because then you can go to the other side and lengthen this one. If you try to stretch them both at the same time, like you would in a passive hang, you don't get as deep a stretch. So maybe if you do like bilateral lat stretching, you might get a 7 out of 10 stretch. But if you do this unilateral side flexion lat stretching, then you get like a 9 out of 10 stretch on each side. And that means when you go to reach up into bilateral shoulder flexion, you've got 9 out of 10 capacity, lengthening capacity in your lats on both sides instead of 7 out of 10. So you're going to be less inhibited reaching overhead. So, same thing with your pecs, yeah? Your pec minor needs to lengthen as you reach overhead. And rather than side flexion, to stretch the pecs, we're going to use this kind of like twisting movement. So if you stretch your pecs bilaterally, you're not going to get as deep as if you twist to one side and kind of stretch one side at a time. So again, you get that kind of, instead of a 7 out of 10 bilateral stretch for the pecs, you get a 9 out of 10 on one side and then 9 out of 10 on the other side. And then you've got this improved capacity, yeah, this 9 out of 10 lengthening when you want to reach overhead. So stretch the pecs and the lats unilaterally. So there's 2 stretches for this. First one for the lats, the side lying ring lat stretch, looks like this. So I'm hanging from a single gymnastics ring in this side lying position, and I want to make sure my working arm is vertical. You can modulate the intensity by lowering the ring. So the higher ring and higher hips will be less intense. Lower ring, lower hips will be more intense, and you need to find a level of intensity you can work with for at least 30 seconds at a time. The next view is this side view, and I'm imagining I've got a brick wall or even an electric fence in front and behind me, and I'm trying to avoid touching them. So I have to keep my hips and chest square forward, or I'm going to get shocked by the electric fence. Yeah, so for pure side flexion, you want to be in this position where you're between the walls or between the fence. If you need to reduce the intensity further, you can take your top leg and put it in front of you, or perform the movement hanging from a bar to give a bit more stability. And for the pec minor, there's this simple stretch that you can do either on the floor, which is a bit more intense, or leaning up against a wall. So you're going to be facing towards whatever surface you're using, and your working arm will have the palm, forearm, and elbow in contact with the wall or floor. And then you'll twist your body away from the floor in order to create a stretch on the pecs. Now it's very important throughout the entire stretch that you keep your working side shoulder as close to the ground as possible, hopefully touching. You can also do some waves of contraction, and in this you'll be pressing your elbow, forearm and palm into the surface for maybe 10 seconds, and then when you release the contraction, you'll try and open your chest away from the floor or wall to deepen the stretch on the pecs. You can also play with the amount of bend in the elbow and also how high the hand is in relation to the head to explore different angles to kind of find out what works best for you. So concept number 3 is the rib cage, the thoracic cage. You need to get this thing moving. Yeah. Anyone who's sort of studied a little bit of biomechanics and thought about this problem will kind of understand, right, my rib cage is the platform for my shoulder girdle, and if I gain a bit of thoracic extension, my shoulders will be at a better angle to reach overhead. My rib cage is more upright, I'm reaching upright, it makes sense. But the thing is, and I made this mistake for years, the thing is people go straight into trying to attack thoracic extension. And in the same way as attacking both lats at the same time instead of one at a time, it doesn't work as well to stretch the rib cage this way. The function of the rib cage is to protect your internal organs. It's super strong, it's relatively rigid. You know, you've got your heart, your lungs, your spleen in there. And to tease this thing into having a bit more movement, you need to do one side at a time. And it's the same kind of principle. You've got your ribs on each side, and as I side flex, I'm kind of opening the ribs on one side, and then I side flex the other way, opening the ribs on the other side. So as one side opens, the other side kind of closes. And this is relevant to thoracic spine stretching because those ribs will insert on the thoracic spine. Yeah, so those vertebrae on your thoracic spine literally have to tilt a little bit as you side flex. So you create a little bit of movement through the thoracic spine, and then thoracic extension is actually opening both sides at the same time. And you're better set up to do this if you first got things moving unilaterally. So you have these side flexion stretches. Again, you can use the side lying ring lat stretch for this. And then we're also going to use rotation. Thoracic twisting or rotation employs the same principle of stretching the spine unilaterally. So we do one side and then the other, and you can see 3 examples here. On the far left, a primer movement stretch, in the middle an unloaded version, and on the far right the most intense loaded and anchored version of the stretch. So I'm going to take you through that now. So I use a heavier dumbbell on the bottom. I kind of thread my arm through and grab onto the heavy bottom dumbbell. And then the dumbbell on the top is lighter. I think it was like 5 or 7 kilos for me. And I basically imagine my arms are a book, and I open the book as far as I can and allow the top dumbbell to kind of pull the book open. And once I'm in that position where gravity is kind of pulling the book open, I'm going to do this isometric contraction. So the arrows represent the isometric contraction. I'm pushing against the weight of the top dumbbell and also simultaneously trying to lift the bottom dumbbell and my bottom elbow off the ground. So I'm trying to close the book. Then as I release the contraction, I try to open the book, and this increases rotation in the thoracic spine and rib cage. You can repeat the series of contractions about 3 times. So it would be 10 seconds of pushing against the weights or trying to close the book, 10 seconds of allowing the weight to open the book further, and then 10 seconds rest before you start the sequence again. Obviously be aware that this loaded version of the stretch with the contractions is very intense, so make sure you spend plenty of time playing with the primer version and the unloaded versions without the contraction. Get your body used to moving in this way, because you'll get a lot of progress and you can open up some rotation in the rib cage and the thoracic spine just with these unloaded versions. And then once your body's really used to the positions and you feel confident with it, then you can slowly start to add loads, starting with very light loads and light contractions, and then just building as you kind of gain confidence in using this stretch. Again, we're just getting the rib cage moving a little bit with these unilateral stretches, so that then once you've used these stretches, then you can go back to the really powerful, like high leverage stretches, bilateral stretches, to kind of actually focus directly on thoracic extension. But I would even argue that you don't need to do that. If you get the rib cage moving a bit, and then you just go practice your overhead activity, whether it's Olympic weightlifting or handstands, because the rib cage has a bit of movement in it now, when you go up into your handstand or you lift your barbell overhead, it's a biological system and it's going to naturally kind of self-organize in the most efficient way. So maybe for some people the thoracic extension work is helpful, but I think for a lot of people, just get the rib cage moving and then do your activity, and you'll find that you'll start doing it with a bit more thoracic extension, and hopefully you'll kind of experience what I've experienced, and you'll finally get rid of that inhibition that's stopping you performing the exercises properly, and and potentially exposing you to a higher risk of injury. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be posting a series of videos which will take a deep dive into each of the stretches I've introduced today and some others. And in these videos, you'll have all the sort of progressions and regressions, or provide alternatives, and I'll go through all the points of performance and the cues for the stretch so you can make sure you're doing them sort of as efficiently as possible. I hope you're excited to try this protocol on yourself, or maybe with your students. And if you do, please let me know how it goes in the comments. And if you have any feedback, that would be awesome. And obviously look out for the sort of deep dive demonstration videos being released over the next couple of weeks. Yeah, awesome. See you in the next video.